My brother hid 7 plates of moldy food under his bed and let me discover the stench alone. Then, when I showed Mom the photos, he laughed and said, "You take cleanliness too seriously." I walked away. That was 8 months ago. This morning, he posted his new work badge online, begging for everyone's praise. My entire bloodline is filled with deadbeat men. I was 13 when I asked my mom why my 26-year-old brother Trent was still living at home, unemployed, with no girlfriend. She just sighed. "You better get used to it, because soon you'll be the one providing for him." I laughed. There was no way. I was going to move across the country the first chance I got, because my dad was somehow even worse than my brother. He had an income, but it was from reselling stolen goods in bulk. We basically had no relationship, so I'm not even sure if that's correct. I just remember being in senior year when I hadn't seen my dad for 2 weeks straight. It wasn't the most absurd thing in the world, but still enough for me to ask my mom where he was. She looked down at the ground. "He's arrested," she said with a whisper. I always felt bad for her. She was the only one in the family who actually worked and tried to be a good parent, so I gave her a hug and promised she wasn't alone in this. And I meant it. I got a job in the local Popeyes for 10 hours a week. I knew it meant my grades would inevitably take a hit, but at the time, I figured it was worth it, because at least this way my mom wouldn't have to worry about putting money into my dad's commissary. And even when I graduated with a 4.0 GPA, I declined all of the college acceptances, because I didn't want my mom to waste her life carrying the weight of the family alone. I took up 40 hours a week at Popeyes, as well as a freelance modeling job which paid around $1,000 a month, but only $200 was actually going into my pocket each month, because by this point, me and my mom were practically parenting 32-year-old Trent, who still hadn't figured it out, and I had become a walking credit card to my dad, who was always trading commissary items for favors from the inmates. And to top it all off, I was helping my mom pay off her heavily indebted credit card bill from when she was the sole earner of the house. I still remember my 19th birthday. I found myself blowing out the candles, wishing for a future. And that evening I reflected. I had gone from having a guaranteed place at Rutgers to being a parent of 2 deadbeat man babies. Anger boiled my blood. I thought about all the dinners my mom insisted on not eating to save money, how she could never say no to Trent and his impossible financial requests, how my dad had stranded her by being an R-word. I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles went white and stormed into my mother's room. I told her I'd keep providing for her and Dad, but Trent had to go. I didn't care where or how. I thought smoke was about to come out of her ears. "How dare you talk about your brother like that? He just needs some time." "Mom, are you serious?" I interrupted. "Look at him. He's a 300-pound spectacle. Mom, he couldn't even finish high school. He's never had a job before. He's taking advantage of you." She slapped me across the face, but her eyes were filled with regret and pain, not anger. I knew I had struck a chord. She told me to get out because she didn't want to live with someone as cruel as me. I didn't argue, didn't shout back, didn't even pack up my stuff, just left. And as I sat in the car, the temples of my head began to throb. Something about seeing the regret in my mom's eyes gave me flashbacks. Suddenly, I was 15 again, giving my mom a pill for heartburn after she found out that Dad was not only cheating on her, but cheating on her with paid escorts, spending money that we didn't have. Then my mind jumped to when I was 17, and it was Trent's 30th birthday. To celebrate, he did a 24-hour video game marathon, meaning he spent all day and night shouting into his computer monitor, and my mom's sleep deprivation ended up costing her a promotion at work. As I sat in the car with my foot on the brake, I knew I had to do something. My mom had spent almost her entire adulthood being bullied, and it was time for Trent and my dad to pay the price. I turned off the car and went back inside. Mom was sitting on the couch with her head in her hands. She looked up, surprised to see me back so soon. "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice calm, "but we need to talk about this properly." She just nodded, looking exhausted. Over the next hour, I laid out the facts. We were spending almost $800 a month just on Trent's food and gaming subscriptions. Dad's commissary and phone calls were another $300. Meanwhile, my mom was working overtime at her job, and I was giving up my entire future to keep this family afloat. "I'm not saying we abandon them," I explained, "but they need to start contributing something." Mom finally admitted she was tired too. She agreed that something needed to change, but she wasn't sure how to make it happen. We stayed up late that night making plans. By morning, we had a strategy. First target, Trent. The next day, I called in sick to work and waited for Trent to wake up, which didn't happen until almost noon. When he finally stumbled into the kitchen looking for food, I was sitting at the table with my laptop. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual. "Got a minute? I need your help with something." He grunted and opened the fridge, pulling out leftover pizza. "The internet's acting weird and I need to submit a job application," I lied. "Can you restart the router for me?" He complained, but eventually waddled over to the living room where the router was. That was step 1, getting him off his butt and moving. Step 2 was getting him interested in something besides video games. "Actually, while you're up, can you help me with this application? It's for a game testing position." That got his attention. Trent loved video games more than anything. "Game testing? Like playing games before they come out?" he asked, suddenly more alert. "Yeah, they pay $18 an hour just to find bugs and stuff, but I don't really have time for it with my Popeyes schedule." I watched as his eyes lit up. For the first time in years, Trent looked interested in something that could potentially earn money. I showed him the application, which was real. I'd found it online that morning. He actually sat down and started reading through it. "You think I could do this?" he asked, sounding uncertain. "Probably better than me," I said truthfully. "You play way more games than I do." He ended up taking over my laptop and spending the next hour filling out the application. I didn't tell tell him that the chances of getting the job were slim or that it required actual skills beyond just playing games. The important thing was that he was doing something productive for once. While he was distracted, I cleared out his room. I didn't throw anything away, but I organized his mess and found 7 plates with moldy food under his bed. The smell was horrific. I took pictures on my phone as evidence. When Mom got home from work, I showed her the pictures. She looked sick. "He's been living like this? In my house?" she whispered. "For years," I confirmed, "and we've been enabling it." That night, Mom did something I never thought I'd see. She sat Trent down and told him things were changing. He would need to start contributing to the household, either with money or by taking over certain responsibilities. And his room needed to stay clean, or he'd be looking for somewhere else to live. Trent threw a massive tantrum. He screamed about how we didn't understand him, how he was networking with his online friends, how he just needed more time to figure things out. But Mom stood firm. I stayed quiet, letting her take the lead. This was her house after all. 1 month, she told him. "You have 1 month to either get a job or start helping around here in a meaningful way." I could tell from his face that he didn't believe her. He thought this was just another empty threat, but I knew different. I'd seen the look in my mom's eyes when she saw those moldy plates. Something had finally broken inside her. With Trent somewhat handled for now, it was time to focus on Dad. This was going to be trickier since he was behind bars and had a lot more experience manipulating Mom than Trent did. I decided to visit him alone the next weekend. The prison was about an hour away, and I'd only been there twice before. I hated everything about the place. The smell, the sounds, the depressing atmosphere. But I needed to look him in the eye when I told him things were changing. When Dad walked into the visiting area, he looked surprised to see just me. "Where's your mom?" he asked, sitting down across from me. "Working," I said. "Someone has to pay the bills." He frowned but didn't say anything. "Dad, we need to talk about money," I started. "Mom and I can't keep sending so much every month." He immediately launched into his usual speech about how hard prison life was, how he needed the commissary money for protection, how he was doing important networking inside that would pay off when he got out. It was the same story he'd been feeding Mom for years. I let him finish before I dropped the bomb. "I know about the gambling," I said quietly. His face changed instantly. He'd been using most of the commissary money to place bets with other inmates. A former cellmate of his had called our house a few months back looking for him, and ended up telling me everything when he realized Dad was still inside. "That's not true," Dad sputtered, but I knew from his expression that I was right. "Here's how it's going to be," I continued. "We'll send enough for basic necessities, nothing more. If you need extra stuff, you can sign up for prison work programs like everyone else." He switched tactics, trying to guilt me about being a bad daughter, abandoning him when he needed family the most, but I just stared him down until he ran out of steam. "Mom doesn't know about the gambling yet," I said as I stood up to leave, "but she will if you keep pushing us for more money." I walked out feeling both terrible and relieved. I'd never stood up to my dad before. Part of me felt guilty for threatening him, but a bigger part felt like I was finally doing something right. When I got home, I found Mom and Trent arguing again. Apparently, he'd decided that his contribution to the household would be managing our social media presence, whatever that meant. Mom looked at me with pleading eyes when I walked in. I could tell she was already backing down from the boundaries she'd set. This was going to be harder than I thought. I jumped in before Mom could give in to Trent's latest scheme. "Social media presence? What does that even mean, Trent?" He looked annoyed that I was questioning his brilliant idea. "You know, like managing our family brand online. It could lead to sponsorships and stuff." I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. "We're not the Kardashians. We're a regular family trying to pay bills." Mom sighed and sat down at the kitchen table. It was obvious she was tired of fighting. She'd been battling these guys for decades, and her energy was completely drained. "Look," I said, trying a different approach. "Why don't we make a list of actual household tasks that need doing? Then Trent can pick which ones he wants to handle." Trent groaned dramatically, but didn't immediately shoot down the idea, which I took as progress. Mom looked relieved that I was taking over the negotiation. We spent the next hour creating a chore chart like we were dealing with a 10-year-old instead of a 32-year-old man. Trent agreed to take out the trash twice a week and do the dishes every other day. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing with a text from an unknown number. It was from Richard, one of Dad's prison buddies. Apparently Dad had given him my number. The message read, "Your dad needs to talk to you. It's urgent. Call him today." I deleted it without responding. This was exactly the kind of manipulation I was trying to break free from. If it was truly urgent, the prison would contact us directly. I had a morning shift at Popeyes that day. When I got home around 3 p.m., Mom was sitting on the couch looking worried. "Your father called," she said. "He says his commissary account is empty and he can't get basic toiletries." I sat down next to her. "I visited him yesterday, told him we're cutting back on the money we send." Her eyes widened. "You did what? Without talking to me first?" "Mom, he's gambling with the money we send. A former cellmate called and told me months ago. Dad's been lying about needing it for protection or whatever." Mom's face went through a series of emotions. Shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, a deep sadness. "Why didn't you tell me? I wanted to have proof first. I didn't want to upset you if it wasn't true." She nodded slowly, processing the information. "So what do we do now?" "We send him enough for actual necessities but nothing extra. He needs to learn he can't keep draining us." Mom agreed, but I knew she was still conflicted. She'd spent so many years responding to Dad's demands that changing now felt almost wrong to her. The next few days were relatively quiet. Trent actually did the dishes twice without being reminded, which felt like a miracle. I worked extra shifts at Popeyes and picked up another modeling gig. Things seemed to be moving in the right direction. Then came the phone call that changed everything. I was at work when my manager told me there was an emergency call from home. My first thought was that something had happened to Mom. I rushed to the phone. "Hello?" I answered, my heart pounding. "Hey, it's me," Trent said, sounding casual as if he hadn't just made me panic. "Mom wanted me to tell you that Dad's getting out early. Good behavior or something. He'll be home next week." I nearly dropped the phone. Dad wasn't supposed to be released for another 6 months. We weren't prepared for this. I'd been counting on having more time to get our lives in order before dealing with him in person. "Did she say anything else?" I asked. "Nah, she's out shopping for stuff for his room. Gotta go." My game's starting. He hung up before I could ask anything else. I stood there in shock for a solid minute before my manager asked if everything was okay. I mumbled something about a family emergency and asked if I could leave early. Thankfully, she agreed. When I got home, Mom was in Dad's old room, changing the sheets and dusting the furniture. She looked happier than I'd seen her in months. "Isn't it wonderful?" she said when she saw me. "The parole board approved his early release. He'll be home next Friday." I forced a smile. "Yeah, that's unexpected." "Did they say why?" "Good behavior and overcrowding, I think." I didn't ask too many questions. I'm just glad he's coming home. I wanted to remind her of all the problems Dad had caused, of how peaceful our home had been without him, but I couldn't bring myself to burst her bubble. She was genuinely happy, and that was so rare these days. Instead, I asked, "Where will he work? Has he mentioned any plans?" Mom's smile faltered slightly. "Well, he has some connections from before. I'm sure he'll figure something out quickly." Those connections were exactly what had landed him in prison in the first place. I bit my tongue and nodded. "I'll help you get the room ready," I offered, changing the subject. Over the next few days, Mom went into full preparation mode. She cleaned the entire house, stocked the fridge with Dad's favorite foods, and even bought him new clothes. It was like watching someone get ready for a first date, not the return of a convicted criminal who had drained our bank accounts for years. Trent, meanwhile, seemed completely unaffected by the news. He continued his regular routine of sleeping until noon, playing video games, and occasionally doing the bare minimum of chores we'd assigned him. The game testing job hadn't materialized, as I'd expected. I tried to stay positive, but deep down, I was terrified of what Dad's return would mean for our household. We'd barely started making progress with Trent. Adding Dad back into the mix felt like adding gasoline to a smoldering fire. The day before Dad's release, I decided to have one more conversation with Mom. I found her in the kitchen, preparing a welcome home meal for tomorrow. "Mom, can we talk about Dad for a minute?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She continued chopping vegetables. "What about him? I'm just wondering if we've thought about some ground rules for when he gets back. You know, about money and contributions to the household." She put down the knife and looked at me. "He just got out of prison. Don't you think we should give him some time to adjust before pressuring him?" "It's not about pressure. It's about setting clear expectations from the beginning. We've been working on getting Trent to contribute more. Shouldn't Dad be held to the same standard?" Mom sighed. "It's different with your father. He's been locked up. He needs time." "Mom, that's exactly what you've been saying about Trent for years. He just needs time. Meanwhile, we're the ones carrying all the weight." She turned back to her chopping, her movements more aggressive now. "I don't want to fight about this. Your father is coming home tomorrow, and I want it to be a happy day." I knew that pushing further would only cause more tension, so I backed off. But I made a private resolution that I wouldn't let Dad slide back into his old patterns without a fight. Friday arrived too quickly. Mom asked me to come with her to pick up Dad from the prison, but I made an excuse about not being able to get off work. The truth was, I couldn't bear the thought of watching their reunion. I knew Mom would be all smiles and forgiveness, and Dad would soak it up without any real remorse. Instead, I arranged to work a double shift at Popeye's. By the time I got home, it was after 10 p.m. I hoped everyone would be asleep, but as I pulled into the driveway, I could see the lights were still on, and there were unfamiliar cars parked outside our house. Inside, I found a full-blown welcome home party in progress. About a dozen people I'd never seen before were crowded into our living room. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, and empty beer cans littered every surface. Trent was actually socializing, looking more animated than I'd seen him in years, as he talked to a couple of sketchy-looking guys in the corner. And there, in the center of it all, was Dad. He looked older than I remembered, with more gray in his hair and new lines around his eyes. But his demeanor was exactly the same, loud, brash, the life of the party. Mom was in the kitchen, frantically making more snacks for the unexpected guests. She looked simultaneously happy and overwhelmed. Dad spotted me standing in the doorway and broke into a wide grin. "There's my girl," he shouted, making his way over to me. He pulled me into a bear hug that smelled like prison soap and cheap beer. I patted his back awkwardly, not returning the enthusiasm. "Look at you," he said, holding me at arm's length. "All grown up and beautiful. Your mom tells me you've been keeping things running around here. Always knew you were the responsible one." Before I could respond, one of his friends called him over, and he was gone, swept back into the celebration. I made my way to the kitchen to check on Mom. "Who are all these people?" I asked, helping her arrange crackers on a plate. "Friends of your father's," she said vaguely. "They wanted to welcome him home." "Friends from where? Prison?" She shot me a warning look. "Be nice. This is a special day for him." I bit back a sarcastic response and continued helping with the food. The party went on until nearly 2 a.m., with people coming and going throughout the night. I stayed in the kitchen as much as possible, avoiding the increasingly rowdy crowd in the living room. When the last guest finally left, I started cleaning up the mess while Mom showed Dad to their bedroom. Trent had disappeared hours ago, presumably to sleep off whatever he'd been drinking. As I was taking out a trash bag full of beer cans, I noticed something fall out of one of Dad's friend's jackets that had been left on a chair. It was a small bag of white powder. I froze, staring at it in horror. This was not just a harmless welcome home party. These were the same kinds of connections that had landed Dad in prison in the first place. I quickly picked up the bag and flushed the contents down the toilet. Then I went to my room and locked the door, my mind racing. Dad had been home less than 24 hours, and already our house was filled with drugs and criminals. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. I found Mom and Dad sitting at the table, drinking coffee and looking like a normal married couple. The house had been cleaned up, no evidence of last night's party remaining. "Morning, sleepyhead," Dad said cheerfully. "Your mom made pancakes." I mumbled a greeting and poured myself some coffee. Mom looked happier than I'd seen her in years, practically glowing with joy at having her husband back. It made what I needed to say even harder. "Dad, can we talk about last night?" I asked, sitting down across from him. His smile faltered slightly. "What about it? Too loud for you?" "It's not the noise. It's the people you had here. I found drugs in the living room after everyone left." Mom gasped. "What? No, that can't be right." Dad's expression hardened. "You going through my friend's belongings now? Playing cop in my house?" "I wasn't going through anything. It fell out of someone's jacket. And this isn't just your house. We all live here. Right. Because you've been so generous, letting your old man come back to his own home." His voice dripped with sarcasm. Mom jumped in. "Nobody's saying you're not welcome, Richard. But if your friends brought drugs here, that's a problem. You're on parole." Dad rolled his eyes. "It was probably just some weed. Don't be so dramatic." "It wasn't weed," I said firmly. "And you know it." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't need this interrogation on my first morning home. I'm going out." "Where?" Mom asked, looking worried. "To see some people about a job," he snapped, grabbing his jacket and keys. After the door slammed behind him, Mom turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Did you have to start a fight immediately? He just got home." "Mom, I'm trying to protect us. He can't have people bringing drugs into our house. He could get sent back to prison, and we could get in trouble too." She wiped her eyes. "I know, but couldn't you have waited a few days? Let him settle in first?" I felt a pang of guilt at her distress, but I stood my ground. The longer we wait to set boundaries, the harder it gets. We've learned that with Trent. Speaking of Trent, he chose that moment to shuffle into the kitchen, looking hungover. "Why was Dad yelling?" he asked, rummaging through the fridge. "Your sister found drugs after the party last night," Mom explained. Trent didn't even look surprised. "Yeah, Jordan and Charles were definitely on something. They offered me some, but I said no." Mom and I exchanged shocked looks. At least Trent had enough sense to turn down hard drugs, but the casual way he mentioned it was disturbing. "Did Dad know they brought drugs?" I asked. Trent shrugged. "Probably. They were his friends from before he went in." This confirmed my fears. Dad wasn't planning to change his ways at all. He was jumping right back into the same lifestyle that had gotten him arrested. Dad didn't come home that night, or the next. Mom tried calling his cell phone repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. By the third day, she was in a complete panic. What if something happened to him? What if he's been arrested again? "We should call the hospitals," she fretted. I tried to be supportive, but part of me was relieved he was gone. The house was peaceful again, and we'd fallen back into our routine. On the fourth day after his disappearance, I came home from work to find Dad sitting on the couch like nothing had happened. He had a new cell phone, new clothes, and a wad of cash that he was counting on the coffee table. "Where have you been?" I demanded. "Mom's been worried sick." He barely looked up. "Taking care of business. Where is she anyway?" "At work, like she always is, supporting this family." He finally glanced up at me, his eyes cold. "You got a real attitude problem, you know that? I'm back now. I'll take care of things." "With what? More stolen goods? More drug deals?" He stood up, towering over me. "Watch your mouth. What I do is my business. I refuse to be intimidated. Not when it affects all of us. Not when you could get arrested again and leave Mom to pick up the pieces." We stood there glaring at each other until the front door opened, and Mom walked in. Her face lit up when she saw Dad. "Richard, oh thank God," she cried, rushing over to hug him. "Where have you been?" I was so worried. His entire demeanor changed instantly. He became the loving husband, full of apologies for making her worry. He spun some story about reconnecting with an old friend who offered him a job in construction, how he'd been staying with him to discuss the details, how his phone had died. Mom believed every word, or at least she wanted to believe it badly enough that she didn't question the obvious lies. I watched in frustration as she forgave him completely, no questions asked. Over the next few weeks, a pattern emerged. Dad would disappear for days at a time, then return with unexplained money and gifts. He never contributed to bills or groceries, but he'd occasionally bring home expensive steaks or electronics that fell off a truck. Mom accepted these gifts gratefully, as if they somehow made up for his absence and lack of real support. Meanwhile, Trent had regressed completely. With Dad back in the picture, he stopped even pretending to help around the house. The two of them would stay up late drinking beer and watching TV, sleeping until noon while Mom and I continued working our jobs and maintaining the household. It was like all our progress had been erased overnight. I felt defeated and angry, watching Mom fall back into her old patterns of enabling both of them. One evening, about a month after Dad's return, I came home to find a strange car in our driveway and raised voices coming from inside. I entered cautiously to find Dad arguing with a man I'd never seen before. They both fell silent when they saw me. "Everything okay?" I asked, looking between them. "Fine," Dad said tersely. "Riley here was just leaving." The man, Riley, looked at me with an odd expression, somewhere between pity and warning. "Yeah, all good. Your dad and I just had a misunderstanding about some money." After he left, I confronted Dad. "What was that about?" "Nothing for you to worry about," he said dismissively. But I did worry. The incident with Riley was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, more strangers showed up at our house looking for Dad. Sometimes he'd meet them outside for quick, tense conversations. Other times, they'd come inside and disappear into the basement with him for hours. Mom pretended not to notice, but I knew she was becoming anxious again. The bags under her eyes got darker, and her smile became forced. She was working extra shifts to cover the increased expenses of having Dad and his friends around constantly. I decided to do some digging. One afternoon when Dad was out, I went through his things. Hidden in his closet, I found a burner phone different from the one he normally used. Scrolling through the texts, I saw messages about product, deliveries, and payments. It was clear he was dealing again. I took photos of the messages as evidence, then put the phone back exactly where I'd found it. I didn't know what I was going to do with this information yet, but I needed proof in case things got worse. And they did get worse. Much worse. One night around 2 a.m., I was awakened by the sound of breaking glass. I crept downstairs to find Dad in the kitchen, clearly drunk or high, rummaging through Mom's purse. "What are you doing?" I asked from the doorway. He jumped, then glared at me. "Mind your own business. That's Mom's purse. It is my business." He abandoned the purse and moved toward me, his movements unsteady. "You think you run this house now? You think you can tell me what to do?" I stood my ground. "I think you're stealing from Mom to support your habit." He laughed, an ugly sound. "My habit? I'm making money, kid. More than you and your mother combined. Then why are you going through her purse at 2 a.m.? His face darkened. "I need some cash for a business opportunity. She'd want me to take it if she was awake." "Then wake her up and ask her." We stood there in a standoff until he finally backed down, muttering curses as he stumbled out of the kitchen. I stayed awake the rest of the night, sitting on the stairs to make sure he didn't try again. The next morning, I waited until Dad left the house, then showed Mom the photos I'd taken of his burner phone messages. "He's dealing again, Mom. And last night I caught him trying to steal money from your purse." She stared at the photos, her hands shaking. "Maybe it's not what it looks like. Maybe, Mom, stop. You know exactly what this is. He hasn't changed. He's never going to change." She broke down crying then, all the hope and joy she'd felt at his return crumbling away. I hated seeing her like this, but we couldn't keep living in denial. "What do we do?" she asked through her tears. "We need to give him an ultimatum. Either he gets clean and finds legitimate work, or he can't stay here anymore." She nodded slowly, though I could tell she was terrified of confronting him. "You're right, but let me be the one to talk to him." I agreed, even though I doubted her ability to stand firm against his manipulation, but it had to be her decision. That evening, Mom sat Dad down in the living room. I stayed in the kitchen, close enough to hear but giving them space. She was gentle but firm, telling him she knew about the dealing and that it had to stop. She offered to help him find legitimate work, to support him through making a real change. At first, he denied everything. When that didn't work, he turned to anger, accusing her of spying on him and not trusting him. Finally, when he realized she wasn't backing down, he switched to remorse, promising he would change, begging for another chance. It was textbook manipulation, and I held my breath, waiting to see if Mom would fall for it again. To my surprise and relief, she held firm. "I love you, Richard," she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. "But I can't keep doing this. You need to make a real change, or you need to leave." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Mom came into the kitchen looking drained but determined. "You did great," I told her, giving her a hug. "He'll be back," she said, "and he'll try to convince me he's changed. I need you to help me stay strong." "I will. We'll do this together." The next few days were tense. Dad came home late every night, avoiding Mom and me. Trent seemed confused by the changing dynamics, but stayed out of it, retreating further into his gaming world. Then came the night that changed everything. I was working a late shift at Popeye's when I got multiple missed calls from Mom. When I finally had a break and called her back, she was hysterical. "The police are here," she sobbed. "They've arrested your father again. They found drugs in the house." My heart sank. "Are you okay? Is Trent okay?" "We're fine, but they searched everything. They're saying your father was operating a distribution network." I left work immediately and rushed home. The police were still there, combing through our belongings. Mom sat on the couch, looking shell-shocked. Trent was actually being useful for once, making her tea and trying to calm her down. One of the officers pulled me aside to ask some questions. I told him truthfully that I'd suspected Dad was dealing again, but didn't have concrete proof beyond some text messages I'd seen. The officer seemed sympathetic, assuring me that they knew the family wasn't involved in Dad's operation. After they finally left, Mom, Trent, and I sat in the living room in stunned silence. "What happens now?" Trent asked, sounding younger than his 32 years. "Dad goes back to prison," I said, "probably for longer this time." Mom wiped her eyes. "I should have kicked him out when you first showed me those messages. This is my fault." "No," I said firmly. "This is Dad's fault. Only his. he made these choices. We sat together late into the night, processing what had happened. For all the pain and chaos Dad had caused, his arrest had done something unexpected. It had united the three of us in a way I hadn't thought possible. The next morning, I woke up to find Trent in the kitchen, awkwardly trying to make breakfast. He'd burned the toast and spilled orange juice everywhere, but he was trying. "What are you doing?" I asked, genuinely surprised. He shrugged, looking embarrassed. "Thought Mom could use a break." It was a small gesture, but it gave me hope. Maybe, just maybe, this crisis could be the turning point we needed. Over the next week, something shifted in our household. With Dad gone and the reality of his choices impossible to ignore, both Mom and Trent seemed to wake up from a long spell of denial. Mom began talking about selling the house and moving to a smaller place, something more manageable on her income. Trent, in a shocking turn of events, asked me to help him look for a job online. He was terrible at it. His resume had more gaps than content, but he was actually trying. I noticed small changes in Trent first. He started picking up after himself more often. He began asking me questions about how bills worked and seemed genuinely concerned when he learned how much Mom was paying for everything. One evening, he even volunteered to cook dinner. It was just frozen pizza, but the fact that he'd thought of it at all was surprising. As weeks passed, I helped Trent apply for several jobs. He'd get frustrated easily and would sometimes slip back into his old habits, gaming for hours instead of following up on applications. But unlike before, he'd catch himself and try again the next day. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but these small steps showed he was trying to change. After his third interview rejection, Trent actually came to me looking disappointed rather than entitled. "What am I doing wrong?" he asked, sitting heavily at the kitchen table. "Job hunting is tough for everyone," I said, "but especially when you don't have experience. Maybe try something entry-level, like a warehouse position." He nodded thoughtfully. "I could do that. I'm pretty strong even if I'm out of shape." I helped him apply for a warehouse job that afternoon. To my surprise, they actually called him back for an interview. Mom and I spent hours coaching him on what to say, how to dress, basic interview etiquette. He was nervous, but determined. The day of the interview, Trent actually got up early, showered, and put on the clean clothes we'd picked out. "How do I look?" he asked anxiously. "Like someone who wants a job," I answered honestly. "That's all that matters." To everyone's surprise, especially his own, he got the job. It was entry-level, minimum wage, and only part-time to start, but it was a real job with a real paycheck. The first day he came home from work, sweaty and exhausted but oddly proud, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe our family could actually heal from the mess Dad had created. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Trent complained constantly about how hard the work was. There were mornings he tried to call in sick because he'd stayed up too late gaming. But Mom and I stood firm, united in our insistence that he needed to follow through on his commitments. As for Dad, he was facing serious charges. His lawyer, a public defender, told us he was looking at a minimum of 5 years, possibly more. Mom went to visit him once at the detention center, but came back resolved to file for divorce. "I can't do this anymore," she told me. "I've spent my whole life waiting for him to change. I'm done waiting." I hugged her tight, proud of her strength and relieved that she was finally choosing herself. The weeks turned into months. We sold the big house and moved into a 3-bedroom apartment that was easier to maintain and much cheaper. Trent continued working at the warehouse, eventually moving up to full-time. He was far from independent. He still lived with us and needed frequent reminders about basic adult responsibilities, but he was contributing. Mom seemed years younger without the constant stress of Dad's chaos. She even started dating again, meeting a kind widower named Charles through a friend at work. The first time she brought him home for dinner, I nearly cried seeing how respectfully he treated her, how he actually listened when she spoke. As for me, I finally had the space to think about my own future. I enrolled in community college part-time at 19, starting the education I'd put on hold. It wasn't Rutgers, but it was a beginning. One evening, about 6 months after Dad's arrest, I was studying at the kitchen table when Mom came home from a date with Charles, practically glowing with happiness. "Good night?" I asked, smiling at her obvious joy. She nodded, sitting down across from me. "Charles asked me to go on a weekend trip with him next month." "That's great, Mom. You should go. But what about you and Trent? What about the apartment?" I laughed. "Mom, I'm 19, not 9, and Trent is a grown man who can microwave his own meals for a weekend. We'll be fine." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "When did you get so mature?" "Probably around the time I realized I was the only adult in this family," I joked, but then turned serious. "You deserve this, Mom. You deserve to be happy." She wiped away a tear. "I'm sorry you had to grow up so fast. I should have been stronger sooner." "Hey, we got here eventually. That's what matters." As I watched her plan her weekend getaway with the excitement of a teenager, I felt like things were finally turning around for us. Like maybe we'd broken the cycle of deadbeats and enablers that had defined our family for so long. But life has a way of testing you just when you think you've got things figured out. About a week before Mom's trip with Charles, I came home from class to find Trent pacing nervously in the living room. He jumped when I walked in, which immediately set off alarm bells. "What's wrong?" I asked, dropping my backpack on the floor. "Nothing," he said way too quickly. Everything's cool. I gave him my best. I'm not buying it, look. And he cracked like an egg. Okay, so I might have done something stupid, he admitted, running his hands through his greasy hair. Remember those guys Dad used to hang out with? Jordan and them? My stomach dropped. Please tell me you haven't been talking to them. It wasn't like that. Jordan reached out to me on Facebook, said he had some of Dad's stuff he wanted to return, said it was valuable. And you believed him? I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. Trent looked at the floor. He came by earlier today, dropped off a package. Where is it? I demanded. Trent pointed to a shoebox on the coffee table. I approached it cautiously, like it might contain a bomb. In a way, it did. When I opened it, I found a series of small plastic bags filled with white powder and pills, along with a burner phone. Are you kidding me? I hissed. You let Dad's drug buddies use you as a drop point? Trent's face went pale. I didn't know what was in it. Jordan said it was watches and jewelry Dad had left with him for safekeeping. I wanted to scream at him for being so naive, but the panic in his eyes told me he genuinely hadn't known. This was exactly how Dad had probably gotten started, doing favors for friends that slowly pulled him into the trade. We need to get rid of this, I said firmly. Right now. But what about Jordan? He said he'd be back tomorrow to pick it up. You're not going to be here tomorrow. You're going to call in sick to work and stay with that friend of yours. What's his name? Morgan? Morgan, Trent confirmed. But what are you going to do? I'm going to handle it, I said, though I had no idea how. But first, we're flushing these drugs. Trent followed me to the bathroom where I emptied each bag into the toilet, watching the powder dissolve in the water. The pills took a few flushes, but eventually everything was gone, except the phone. I wrapped it in a washcloth and smashed it with a hammer, then divided the pieces between 3 different trash bags. What do I tell Jordan when he asks about his stuff? Trent asked, looking genuinely scared for the first time. Nothing. You're not going to talk to him ever again. Block him on everything. After making sure Trent had packed an overnight bag and called Morgan to arrange his stay, I drove him across town. On the way, I gave him a crash course in why you don't accept mystery packages from your convicted father's criminal associates. I really didn't know, he repeated for the 10th time as I pulled up to Morgan's apartment building. I believe you, I sighed, but you've got to start thinking, Trent. You're too old to be this naive. He nodded, looking embarrassed. What about Mom? Should we tell her? Absolutely not. She's finally happy for once. I'll handle Jordan. After dropping Trent off, I drove home and spent the night researching Jordan on social media. I found his profile easily enough. He wasn't exactly trying to hide. His page was filled with photos of him partying, showing off cash and expensive watches. Typical dealer behavior, flaunting wealth with no visible job. The next day was Friday, and I called in sick to both work and school. I didn't know exactly when Jordan would show up, but I wanted to be ready. Around 11 a.m., a black Dodge Charger pulled into our apartment complex, and Jordan stepped out wearing designer sunglasses and a jacket that probably cost more than our monthly rent. I watched from the window as he swaggered to our door and knocked. Taking a deep breath, I opened it. His smug expression faltered when he saw me instead of Trent. Where's your brother? Not here, I said, blocking the doorway. And neither is whatever you left with him. Jordan's face hardened. Where is it? Gone. And don't bother threatening me or him. I've already documented everything and sent it to multiple people. If anything happens to us, it goes straight to the police. I was bluffing, but he didn't know that. Jordan studied my face, trying to determine if I was serious. Your daddy know you're messing with his business? He asked. My dad's in prison because of his business, I shot back. And we're done being collateral damage. Find another family to destroy. Jordan stepped closer, trying to intimidate me with his height. You have no idea who you're dealing with, little girl. Neither do you, I said, standing my ground. Now get off our property before I call the cops and report a drug dealer harassing me. I've got your license plate and plenty of witnesses around this complex. I gestured to the nosy neighbor across the way, who was blatantly watching our interaction from her window. Mrs. Patterson might be a pain sometimes with her complaints about our TV being too loud, but right now her surveillance hobby was exactly what I needed. Jordan followed my gaze to Mrs. Patterson, then looked back at me with pure hatred, but he backed up. This isn't over, he growled. Yes, it is, I said, and closed the door in his face. I watched through the peephole as he stormed back to his car, punched the hood once, then drove away. My knees nearly buckled with relief once he was gone. I had no idea if my bluff would hold, but at least I'd bought us some time. I called Trent immediately to update him. Is it safe for me to come home? He asked. Maybe give it another day, I suggested, just to be sure. That evening, I sat Mom down and gave her a sanitized version of events, saying one of Dad's old friends had stopped by looking for him and seemed sketchy. I didn't mention the drugs or the threat, just that I thought we should be careful about opening the door to strangers. Mom looked worried. Should we call the police? Not yet, I said. He didn't actually do anything illegal, but maybe we should think about moving again, somewhere Dad's friends don't know about. She nodded slowly. I've been thinking that anyway. This place has too many bad memories. The next day, Trent came home, and life went back to normal, or what passed for normal in our family. Mom went on her weekend trip with Charles and came back looking happier than I'd seen her in years. Trent continued working at the warehouse, and I kept up with my classes. I started to think maybe the Jordan situation was actually over. 3 weeks passed without any sign of him. Then the notes started appearing. The first one was tucked under our windshield wiper, just a plain white paper with "watching you" printed on it. It could have been random, but the timing felt too suspicious. The second note came a few days later, slipped under our apartment door. Payback coming. I kept both notes from Mom, but showed them to Trent, who went pale. What do we do? He asked, his voice shaking. We move, I said decisively, sooner rather than later. That night, I discussed it with Mom, framing it as wanting a fresh start in a different neighborhood, closer to my college. She was hesitant at first. We'd only been in this apartment for a few months, but eventually agreed it made sense. Charles mentioned his building has a vacancy, she suggested. It's a secure complex with cameras and everything. The thought of living in the same building as Mom's boyfriend was a little weird, but security sounded pretty good right about now. We arranged to see the apartment that weekend. Charles's building was much nicer than ours, an actual locked entrance, hallway cameras, and a small gym in the basement. The apartment itself was similar in size to our current place, but freshly renovated. More importantly, it was in a completely different part of town, and the building required visitors to be buzzed in. We signed the lease that day and started packing immediately. I was so paranoid about Jordan finding out where we were moving that I insisted we tell absolutely no one our new address except Charles and Morgan. Moving day arrived without incident. Trent had actually saved enough from his warehouse job to rent a small moving truck, which felt like a minor miracle. As we loaded the last of our belongings, I kept scanning the street for Jordan's black Charger, but there was no sign of him. The new apartment complex felt safer immediately. Just the act of having to be buzzed in made me breathe easier. We spent the first night unpacking the essentials and ordering pizza, all three of us giddy with the feeling of a fresh start. Around midnight, as I was making up my bed, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. New place is nice, locks won't help. My blood ran cold. I checked all the windows and doors twice, then sat awake until dawn, jumping at every noise. When morning came, I showed the text to Trent, but kept it from Mom. She was finally happy with Charles. I didn't want to ruin that. We need to go to the police, Trent said after seeing the message. And tell them what? We flushed a bunch of drugs that we can't prove existed? That some guy is sending us vague, threatening texts? I didn't mention my biggest concern, how Jordan had found our new address. Someone must have told him, maybe a former neighbor, or perhaps he had connections that worked for the moving company. The building had security, but it wasn't Fort Knox. A determined person could follow someone inside, or claim to be delivering something. Then what's your plan? Trent challenged, actually showing some backbone for once. I didn't have one, and that terrified me. For the next week, I was constantly looking over my shoulder. I walked Mom to her car every morning and made sure Trent never went anywhere alone. No more texts came, but the damage was done. I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. Then came the break-in. I got home from class to find our apartment door slightly ajar. Heart pounding, I called Trent, who was at work, and Mom, who was with Charles, confirming both were safe. Then I called the building manager, who came up with me to check the apartment. Nothing was stolen. In fact, nothing was even disturbed, except for my bedroom. On my pillow sat a small plastic bag of white powder with a note. Next time it goes to the cops, with your fingerprints. I flushed the drugs immediately, before the building manager could see them. When he asked if anything was missing, I lied and said no, everything was fine. I didn't file a police report. I couldn't risk them finding drug residue in our apartment, not with Dad's history. That night, I made a decision. This had to end, and I was done being reactive. It was time to take the fight to Jordan. The next day, I skipped class and drove to the address I'd found on Jordan's Facebook page. It was a flashy condo in a gentrifying area of town. I parked across the street and waited, rehearsing what I would say. Around noon, Jordan emerged from the building, getting into his Charger. Instead of confronting him, I followed at a distance. He drove to a small coffee shop and went inside. Through the window, I could see him meeting with another man, older, better dressed, probably his supplier. I took photos with my phone, making sure to get clear shots of both their faces. Then I continued following Jordan throughout the day, documenting his stops at what were obviously drop points for his dealing operation. By evening, I had dozens of photos, timestamps, and addresses, enough evidence to cause serious problems for Jordan if it fell into the right hands. That night, I created a secure email account and sent Jordan a message with just one photo attached, him handing a package to a teenage kid behind a convenience store. The subject line read, "I have more. Leave us alone, or these go to Detective Williams." Detective Williams was the officer who had arrested my dad. I figured his name would carry weight. 2 days passed with no response. I was starting to think my plan had failed when I got a text from the same unknown number. Deal. Disappear from my life, I'll disappear from yours. I didn't respond, but I saved the message, just in case. A month went by with no further contact from Jordan. The threatening texts stopped. No more break-ins or notes. I still checked over my shoulder constantly, but gradually, the knot in my stomach began to loosen. Trent continued surprising me with his commitment to the warehouse job. He'd been promoted to shift lead and was talking about getting his GED. Mom spent more and more time with Charles, eventually staying at his place most nights. Our new apartment began to feel like a real home. As for me, I threw myself into my classes, determined to make up for lost time. I'd switched my major to social work, inspired by everything we'd been through. Maybe I could help other families break their own cycles of dysfunction. 6 months after the Jordan incident, Mom announced she and Charles were getting married. It was fast, but I'd never seen her so happy. The wedding was small, just us, Charles's adult children, and a few friends from work. Trent actually wore a tie and behaved like a normal human being throughout the ceremony. At the reception, as I watched Mom and Charles slow dancing, Trent came to stand beside me. "We did it," he said quietly. "Did what?" "Got her out. Got ourselves out." He nodded toward Mom. "Look at her. I've never seen her smile like that." I studied my brother's face, realizing he'd lost weight and gained some confidence. The perpetual boy was finally becoming a man, years later than he should have. You know, he continued, I always thought I'd end up exactly like Dad. It seemed, I don't know, inevitable or something, but maybe not. Definitely not, I said firmly. That's not who you are anymore. He clinked his water glass against mine. Thanks for not giving up on me, even though I was a total waste of space. You're my brother, I said simply, even when you were driving me crazy. Shortly after the wedding, Mom moved in with Charles permanently. Their condo was too small for all of us, so Trent and I kept the apartment. To my shock, he consistently paid his half of the rent on time. We weren't exactly close, too much history for that, but we developed a decent roommate relationship. Dad reached out from prison occasionally with letters full of excuses and manipulation. I read the first few, then started throwing them away unopened. Mom filed for divorce and was granted it without contest. She kept her new married name, eager to shed the last connection to her old life. A year after we'd fled our old apartment, I got an unexpected text from a former classmate. Jordan had been arrested in a major drug bust. His supplier had flipped on everyone, and Jordan was looking at serious time, possibly in the same prison as my dad. The irony wasn't lost on me. That night, I deleted all the photos I'd taken of Jordan's dealing operation. I didn't need that insurance policy anymore. We were finally free, from Dad, from Jordan, from the weight of generations of deadbeat men. My bloodline might be filled with losers and criminals, but that legacy ended with me. I was charting a new course, one class at a time. Trent was rewriting his story too, in his own way. And Mom? She was finally living the life she deserved, with a man who treated her with respect. As for me, I still worked at Popeyes while taking classes, but now I was saving for myself, not supporting the dead weight of my family. I had plans, real plans, for my future. Maybe I'd never get to Rutgers, but I'd find my own path. The cycle was broken, and that was enough.